They called it mentorship. It started in quiet rooms with name tags and warm handshakes, the kind that signal you belong. Doors closed, phones stayed down, money moved later. By 7:42 p.m., the pitch was already done. Senior alumni spoke about legacy, about lifting the next class, about protecting the school's name. What they did not say was when to get out. That part came after, folded into private emails and side meetings, shared only with those who had been there long enough. Younger members wrote checks believing performance would matter. It did not. Timing did. Liquidity flowed upward, not outward. Returns appeared, then vanished, depending on where you stood in the circle. By the time questions surfaced, the exits were already booked. Losses settled quietly on those still smiling for group photos. No alarms, no warnings, just trust, converted into cash, and silence where accountability should have been. Chapter 1. The invitation list. The email arrived without logos or signatures. Subject line plain. Alumni private briefing. It came from an address most recipients recognized but had never questioned. The tone was friendly, restrained, confident. Attendance was limited. Dress was business. Phones discouraged. By 6:30 p.m., the hotel ballroom was already sealed. Security checked names against a printed list. No walk-ins, no plus ones. Each attendee received a badge with a small mark in the corner. Gold, silver, white. No explanation was given. Servers moved quietly along the walls. The room smelled of polished wood and espresso. Tables were round, arranged to prevent anyone from sitting alone. Senior alumni stood near the center, greeting arrivals by first name. They asked about careers, families, recent promotions. The familiarity felt earned. For some, it was. The circle was introduced without ceremony. A speaker stepped forward. A graduate from 3 decades earlier, now a managing partner at a private investment firm. He spoke calmly. He spoke about stewardship. He spoke about access. This was not a fund, he said. This was a network. A way to keep opportunity inside the family. Alumni helping alumni. Capital circulating among people who shared values and history. The word investment came later. Softly, almost as an aside, a slide appeared on the screen. No numbers at first, just arrows moving between boxes labeled with neutral terms. Growth, stability, liquidity. The speaker explained that alumni often missed early opportunities because they were outside the room. This fixed that problem. Another speaker followed, a former board member. He described mentorship dinners that turned into partnerships. He described founders who needed patient capital and alumni who could provide it. He described success stories without dates or dollar figures. No one mentioned risk. At 7:12 p.m., printed packets appeared on the tables, glossy covers. Inside, a summary of the circle's mission and structure. The language was careful, educational, advisory. The legal disclaimers were dense and unread aloud. One page described a special purpose vehicle. It was framed as a convenience, a way to aggregate interest and simplify administration. The vehicle was managed by an alumni-controlled entity. Oversight was internal. Another page described liquidity events. That phrase appeared only once. It was followed by a sentence about timing being dependent on market conditions and member status. Several attendees circled that line. No one asked about it out loud. After the presentation, the room broke into clusters. Senior members drifted between tables. Junior alumni listened. Business cards exchanged hands. Promises of follow-up were made. A mid-career alum named Daniel stood near the bar. He had graduated 12 years earlier. His career was stable, not spectacular. He had been invited by a former professor who now sat on an advisory council. The invitation felt like validation. A senior alum approached him. Spoke about Daniel's industry. Spoke about how hard it was to break through without backing. Spoke about how the circle had changed that for others like him. They talked about a specific opportunity, a growing company, strong fundamentals, early traction. The senior alum said the circle had secured access before outside funds arrived. Daniel asked about returns. The answer was vague but confident, competitive, consistent, aligned. He asked who decided when to exit. The senior alum smiled and said that depended on seniority and availability. It was framed as fairness. Those who had contributed longer had priority. Daniel nodded. It sounded reasonable. Across the room, another alum asked a similar question. He was told exits were coordinated to protect the network. That sudden withdrawals could hurt everyone. Patience was a virtue here. At 8:05 p.m., the speakers reconvened the room. They announced that expressions of interest would be collected over the next 2 weeks. Participation was voluntary. No pressure. They said the circle had no obligation to accept everyone. The packet included a form. It asked for intended contribution range. It asked for graduation year. It asked for willingness to assist with outreach. That last line was easy to miss. Daniel filled out the form that night. He selected a modest range. He checked yes on outreach. It felt like the right thing to do. Alumni helping alumni. 2 days later, he received a follow-up email. Thank you for your interest. Based on your profile, we see strong alignment. A call was scheduled. The call was brief. The tone remained friendly. Daniel was told his contribution would be pooled with others from his graduating decade. The vehicle would deploy capital in tranches. Performance updates would be quarterly. He asked again about liquidity. The answer came faster this time. Senior members exited first to stabilize returns. Junior members benefited from reduced volatility. That explanation went unchallenged. Within a month, funds were wired. Daniel received confirmation. The paperwork emphasized long-term alignment. It emphasized trust. The first update arrived 90 days later. The numbers looked good. Not extraordinary, but positive. A note at the bottom mentioned that a portion of senior interests had been redeemed to rebalance exposure. Daniel did not understand what that meant. He assumed it was routine. Over the next 6 months, more updates arrived. Returns flattened, then dipped. The explanations shifted. Market headwinds, strategic repositioning, temporary. At a second alumni mixer, smaller this time, Daniel overheard a conversation. 2 older alumni discussed timing. One mentioned how fortunate he was to have exited before the last round. The other laughed and said that was the advantage of being early. Daniel asked what they meant. The conversation stopped. Someone changed the subject. That night, Daniel reread the original packet. He focused on the special purpose vehicle section. He noticed language he had skimmed before. Priority distributions. Discretionary timing. He searched his emails. He found an internal memo forwarded accidentally by a circle coordinator. It referenced liquidity windows for senior members only. It framed this as a stabilizing mechanism. Daniel realized then that performance was not the primary driver. Position was. The circle was not just matching capital to opportunity. It was sequencing exits. Those at the top converted paper value into cash while others remained locked in. The next update arrived a week later. Losses were now acknowledged. They were described as unrealized. Daniel requested a call. He was told the redemption period had closed. His capital was committed for the foreseeable future. At 9:18 p.m., he forwarded the internal memo to another alum from his class. The response came quickly. I thought I was the only one. The pressure inside the circle shifted that night, quietly, without announcement. Trust began to crack, and the exits were already sealed. Chapter 2, the downward transfer. The first sign that something was wrong did not come from losses. It came from language. In late March, a small group of alumni received notices informing them that communications related to the circle were subject to preservation. The emails were careful. They used neutral phrasing. Routine compliance review. No allegation of wrongdoing. No admission of concern. Behind the scenes, a regulator had requested documents. The request focused on sequencing. Who entered deals first? Who exited? Who bore losses when valuations fell? The circle's administrators responded by exporting email threads that spanned years. What emerged was not chaos. It was order. Messages showed that investments were not deployed evenly across cohorts. Older graduating classes were consistently placed into earlier tranches. Younger alumni entered later, often at higher valuations, often closer to liquidity events already mapped internally. One thread, dated 11:20 a.m., June 14, 2019, showed a senior coordinator flagging a concern. If we let the newer group in before the redemption window, it shifts downside to them. Response came 6 minutes later. That is the point. Stabilize senior exits. The phrasing was clinical. No hostility, no mockery, just mechanics. When asked about that language, circle representatives described it as internal shorthand. They said it did not reflect intent. They said the structure benefited all members over time, but time was not distributed evenly. Interviews with mid-career alumni painted a consistent picture. Many described social pressure rather than financial persuasion, calls framed as check-ins, dinners positioned as mentorship. subtle reminders of who had opened doors in the past. One alum, a woman who graduated 15 years earlier, described being asked to bring in 2 colleagues from her class. Not as investors, she said, but as participants. She was told broader participation strengthened the circle's negotiating position. When she hesitated, the tone changed. She was reminded of introductions she had received early in her career. She was reminded of favors. She brought him in. Data analysis later showed that her cohort absorbed some of the steepest unrealized losses after a valuation correction the following year. The turning point came when a term sheet surfaced during the document review. It was attached to a routine update email buried between attachments. The clause was brief. It transferred downside exposure to the most recent tranche holders in the event of early redemptions. The clause had been disclosed. Technically, it was on page 23 of a document labeled Supplemental Terms. No one interviewed recalled it being explained. At the midpoint of the reporting process, a pattern became undeniable. The circle functioned less like a shared investment pool and more like a ladder. Each rung supported the one above it. Senior members exited during favorable windows. Their returns were locked. Junior members remained exposed, holding positions that absorbed volatility created by those exits. A redemption deadline loomed. Internal calendars marked it clearly. The date determined which tranche could request liquidity and which could not. As the deadline approached, messaging intensified. Emails encouraged patience. They framed exits as disruptive. They warned of reputational harm if too many requests arrived at once. At the same time, private messages circulated among senior alumni. They coordinated submissions. They discussed timing down to the hour. One message sent at 6:58 a.m. on the final day read simply, "Submit now. Window closes at noon." At 12:05 p.m., junior members attempting to submit requests received automated responses. Redemption period closed. Losses crystallized soon after. Circle administrators described the outcome as market-driven. They said valuation shifts were unpredictable. They said the structure protected the institution. What they did not dispute was the sequencing. When confronted with the emails, legal counsel for the circle stated that priority distributions were a common feature of private vehicles. They emphasized that participation was voluntary and documents were provided. What remained unresolved was whether social obligation had replaced informed consent. Several alumni reported feeling trapped, not legally but relationally. Withdrawing complaints felt like betrayal. Speaking publicly risked professional fallout. The circle's power extended beyond capital. As pressure mounted, the circle reduced communications. Updates became shorter. Meetings were canceled. References to mentorship disappeared. The countdown ended without announcement. The ladder had done its work. For those at the bottom, the losses were not catastrophic, but they were real. Savings delayed, careers redirected, trust broken. The investigation now faced a final question. Was this structure merely aggressive, or was it intentionally designed to move risk downward under the cover of alumni loyalty? The answer depended on what came next. Chapter 3, The Quiet Unwind. The findings were released on a Friday afternoon. No press conference, no public announcement. A notice posted to a regulatory docket summarized the outcome in restrained language. Certain disclosures were deemed inadequate. Certain communications were found to be misleading in context. No criminal charges were filed. What was proven was narrow. Documents showed that priority distributions existed and were exercised. Senior members redeemed interests ahead of others. Losses were absorbed disproportionately by later entrants. These facts were not disputed. What remained alleged was intent. Regulators stopped short of calling the structure fraudulent. They noted that participation was voluntary and that disclosures, while buried, were technically present. The line between aggressive financial engineering and deception was thin, and it held. The circle issued a statement through counsel within hours. It emphasized compliance. It emphasized sophistication of participants. It denied any scheme to harm junior members. The statement did not address the internal emails. Privately, administrators began unwinding the network. No formal dissolution vote was held. No farewell message was sent. Communication slowed, then ceased. Assets were moved into secondary vehicles. Interests were sold at discounts. Some senior alumni recovered additional value through private sales arranged quietly outside the circle's original structure. Junior members were not offered those opportunities. Several alumni interviewed described receiving one final update. It framed the wind down as a strategic transition. It thanked participants for their trust. No apology appeared. For those who exited early, the experience faded quickly. Their returns were already realized. Their reputations remained intact. Many continued to serve on boards and advisory councils connected to the school. For others, the cost lingered. One alum described delaying a home purchase. Another described stepping back from a startup role after personal savings thinned. None described ruin. All described regret. More than money was lost. The circle had relied on shared identity, school colors, reunion dinners, stories of professors in dorm rooms. It turned that identity into leverage. When asked why they stayed silent for so long, several alumni gave similar answers. They did not want to be seen as disloyal. They did not want to hurt the institution. They did not want to jeopardize future opportunities. Trust had replaced transparency, and trust had been used. The school itself issued a brief clarification weeks later. It stated that the circle was not an official program. It stated that alumni associations were independent entities. It stated that no school funds were involved. The clarification satisfied legal requirements. It did little to address the cultural damage. In private conversations, administrators acknowledged surprise at the structure's outcome. Some claimed they had not understood the mechanics fully. Others said the model had evolved over time. Documents showed otherwise. The sequencing had been discussed years earlier. The risk transfer was not accidental. Accountability proved elusive. No senior member returned profits. No disciplinary actions were announced. The regulator closed the matter with recommendations for clearer disclosures in future alumni investment vehicles. The circle ceased to exist in name only. Its functions persisted in smaller forms: private introductions, quiet deals, selective access. What changed was awareness. Alumni who had once trusted invitations now asked for documents. They asked about priority. They asked about exits. Some declined participation altogether. The story did not end with a verdict or a sentence. It ended with a recalibration of trust. In networks built on shared history, power often hides in plain sight. It does not shout. It invites. It frames extraction as stewardship and calls it loyalty. The alumni circle had promised to lift everyone together. In practice, it had built a staircase and decided who climbed first. The final cost was not measured only in dollars. It was measured in silence, in relationships strained, in the slow realization that access without accountability is just another market. And markets, when left unchecked, always find a way to turn belonging into exit liquidity.